In a recent deep dive on the Phoenix Suns, ESPN's Zach Lowe said there's no viable Deandre Ayton trade that would keep the Suns a title contender, and that whatever it takes to repair their relationship, that should be priority number one this season. We know Frank Vogel has already been treating it that way. So on today's episode of Locked On Suns, why passing and personality are the two keys to get there. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Happy Wednesday. We're down to the 3 days a week ritual routine just for this month. Hope everybody is hanging in tight during the dog days of the offseason. The NBA doesn't want us to have a Damian Lillard trade, and the Suns are keeping quiet with their roster mostly set, but we'll be here for you, so hit follow or subscribe. Just search Locked On Suns to find this show wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And again, yes, hit follow, hit subscribe, get us in your feed 3 times a week throughout August and daily come the start of the season. Just those extra 24 hours, though, give us plenty to talk about. Drop your comment if you are on YouTube with your expectations for DA here in his, 5th season, whatever it is that he's in. We're going to talk all about Deandre Ayton today. I was inspired. A comment in the YouTube section last week when I was tiptoeing around the Ayton conversation and being, a smart aleck, smart mouth, smart you-know-what about all of it. And he was like, just talk about the guy. He's a basketball player and he plays on the team you cover. Point taken, commenter. So here we are. We're going to talk all about him today because, again, Zach Lowe in this article, which I highly recommend. It is behind a paywall at ESPN, but very worth, I think it's worth your money. They do a lot of great stuff, and you get the streaming as well. He said there's no viable trade right now turning Ayton into the kinds of players or picks that would maintain or boost the Suns' title odds. Then he went on to say, this mostly being obviously his opinion, that the Suns' top priority should be doing whatever it takes to repair their relationship with Ayton and lift him back up. So we'll get into the personality, the sticky stuff, in the next segment, but I want to let my imagination run a little bit wild here, and I want yours to as well. And I want to go back. I tweeted this clip or this highlight video on YouTube from like the first month of Ayton's career when he had like 24 points and 5 assists in a game, and it's hilarious to go back. It's Mikal Bridges, it's Josh Jackson, it's DeAnthony Melton. It is all of these different former Suns, which pretty much everybody is a former Sun at this point. And they're all receiving passes from him and cutting and getting to the basket. And you're seeing Ayton as a, top of the key playmaker, a post scorer, all these different things. And it is crazy. I know the defense is most important. And maybe I'm overlooking it in order to talk about his offense. And maybe you listening at home, watching at home, do worry about the defense. I tend not to. I look at Frank Vogel's track record, and I look at Ayton's own track record, especially during the finals run, and even the year before, and even at points in the past couple of years, despite some inconsistencies and effort problems under Monty's last 2 seasons. Even those years, there were moments. It's not as if it fell away, but especially that finals run, coupled with Vogel and his history with guys like Roy Hibbert and Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard and even like Bismack Biyombo or Nikola Vucevic in Orlando, like he tends to get the best out of his players, of his centers defensively. So that's all to say that the offensive stuff in that highlight video I'm watching, you can just pick these moments from any point really during Deandre Ayton's career. I'm reminding you, literally this I'm talking about, and you can go to my Twitter and see it, is from the first month of his NBA career. And I swear to you, this is not just for the sake of doing a good show or making my argument here. You see him do stuff in that video that you would have forgotten watching him this past season when he is theoretically closer and closer to his prime as a basketball player. You might have forgotten that he was even capable of it. He's taking multiple dribbles in the post. He is getting to his hook shot. He is, catching the ball and making a quick decision. Again, picking out cutters as a passer. Most of those highlights, again, offensively, he was a tire fire. Defensively, his rookie year. But the passing is really where I come. And we'll talk about an even more imaginative, even more out of the box, potentially just pie in the sky aspect of his game in just a moment. And we will get to Udoka Azubuike later on in the show too, guys, who signed a 2-way contract. But the passing, it's the passing that I can't help but think about. And he had a 10.2% assist rate in college during his 1 year at U of A. And coming out, that was always one of the things, if you were making the case for Deandre Ayton, that he was going to be better than, the worst case comps for him, which were, Andre Drummond or DeAndre Jordan or, guys like that. If you thought he was going to be better than that, the athleticism advantage that he has over some of those guys is probably part of what you would say, but the passing and the skill development was another part of it. I'm not here to tell you that he's going to become even, like Mason Plumlee, who's like an underrated passer. He's definitely not going to be Sabonis or Jokic or these guys. But I think it can be a plus for him. His assist rate fell to around 7% the two first Chris Paul years. And then back up to around 9% last year when the ball was in his hands a little bit more, especially due to the injuries and everything, the lack of availability, lack of continuity with the rotation. When he was out there, he was going to get opportunities. He didn't do the most with them, but that assist rate jumped back up to what it had been his first 2 seasons. What that shows me is that at least, you just flat out, before we even talk about the Ayton compared to himself, there's great centers in this league who don't even do that, right? Joel Embiid has had a negative assist to turnover ratio most of his career. He does have a higher total assist percentage, but, the turnovers balance it out. I don't think of him as an elite passer by any means, and then there's the more ground-bound and offensively uninclined players like a Rudy Gobert, who had a 6% assist rate last year, and his high was 1 year where it was near 10, but that's an outlier. It's been mostly around 6 or 7. Miles Turner. There are plenty of guys who are only play finishers. They're never going to be somebody who can create for their teammates. Miles Turner had a 7.5% assist rate last year, but that was a little bit high for him. He's been around 5 or 6 most of his career. And these are all players we would think of as relatively equal to, if not maybe even better than DeAndre Ayton, right? So the reason I focus in on this and chart that all out is I think it can get even higher than it was in college. And I think maybe the assist rate is going to be hard to necessarily consistently get, but I still think you can get it past the 10.2% that he had it in college, maybe 11, 12%. And that's, I just listed Miles Turner, Rudy Gobert, he would be doubling those guys up. That is a real way to make an impact on this team. And so another kind of trend that I'll point to here is he received, and this is receiving, so it's not the same thing as him making passes, but he got 6.7 passes per game from Devin Booker their first year together during DA's rookie season. That number, passes that Ayton has received from Booker, has been around 3 per game since. So pretty much less than half in almost every year since that first season that they played together. You look last postseason, and it's a little hard to do in the regular season because KD wasn't really around, and I don't know if the numbers qualify because he played so few minutes in Phoenix, so that was a little tricky to see. But the playoffs, he received 6.1 passes per game from Kevin Durant. Ayton did, right? And then you just look, and a lot of what the Zach Lowe article is about is Beal specifically, and one of the things that allowed the Washington offense to be what it was is their star players tended to have a decent amount of chemistry, particularly Beal and Porzingis, but I would say even Kuzma. And there were some good moments. A lot of those guys weren't consistently available, and the rest of the talent was really young and not very good, but there were a lot of good dribble handoff, good two-man game actions between Porzingis and Beal that I just don't see why it couldn't be transported to Ayton. And so if you're talking about a connection that he's had with Booker in the past, with KD more recently, and with Beal potentially, plus the ability that we know he has to operate as a facilitator, that is going to be the most obvious way for this team to get around his point guard issues, right? They don't necessarily have somebody who is going to be threading the needle and being the guy to set players up in all of these creative off-ball actions. Somebody like Beal or Booker is going to have to sacrifice a little bit of the gravity and shooting threat that they pose by having the ball in their hands. I think that's totally fine. I think the Suns team could still be the best offense in the NBA, but wouldn't it be nice if the center who wants to be more involved and who needs to be more involved to kind of feel committed to the group? Right or wrong, that's the reality of what Ayton is. Wouldn't it be nice if that guy could facilitate a little bit for you and at least be part of a more balanced, egalitarian offense? I think it's possible. I think it's there, and I think history shows that he can at least dip into that more than maybe he did the past 2 years when Chris Paul dominated things. Let's actually save the more pie in the sky thing for the next segment and talk, speaking of Chris Paul, we've talked a lot about what Monty leaving might do. I want to remind you of the Chris Paul factor as well. We'll dive into that next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here's the deal. Take your first swing. Bet MLB on FanDuel, and you get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20, and you'll land $200 back in bonus bets. Win or lose, that's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. The Diamondbacks are swinging a little low in the standings right now, so maybe you hit them on NL West champion, maybe you hit them on wild card spot. I'm sure you could get plus odds on both, considering they're on the fringe. They're not leading the division. They are on the fringe of even getting a wild card spot. That might feel good. They just got a closer. Get some money. It'll be even more satisfying when it happens. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, let's keep it rolling here. We're talking Deandre Ayton. I'll finish off my imaginative, what are we doing? A fairy tale? Is that what I should call it? Here on Ayton, and then we'll get to Azubuike later. Deandre Ayton's been a bad free throw shooter the past 2 playoff runs. Below 70%. Some really ugly nights where you really feel like if he just made a few, things could be different. You know, close games where he misses 3, 4, 5 free throws at a time. It is noticeable, and it is a trend. It's 2 consecutive playoffs where that was the case. And that's not necessarily a surprise, right? I mean, he's a player that had mental stuff seemingly going on, commitment issues and inconsistency of effort and all those different things. It makes sense that free throw shooting, which is solely a focus thing, would falter. But again, if we look back to college and we allow ourselves to just think of what are things, not the same old story of Deandre Ayton, right? Of he needs to be more ferocious, he needs to be more aggressive, and even Zach Lowe in that article points to, you know, the noticeable, visible sighs and moans and groans that we would see from the sideline when he passed up a dunk for a layup and front, you know, hit it off the glass and it caromed off and all that stuff. Let's leave that alone. Let's leave the why won't he dunk more or block more shots stuff alone. But when you think of free throw shooting, that's one part of it, but also threes. I'm not going to the direction of getting to the line more. That's part of what I'm saying I'm leaving alone. I'm talking about shooting, just being better at it, you know? And I just look at the shooting. It's not even so much those poor playoff performances. It's the opposite. It's the fact that he's been a pretty good free throw shooter. And again, in college, he made threes. I'm not trying to sit here. It's why I saved it for the second segment. I'm not trying to tell you that that's going to happen. I'm not letting my imagination rule my more logical brain. But what I'm saying is I'm willing to imagine Ayton doing some of the stuff that bizarrely just dropped off when Monty arrived. Okay? Like, it was obvious and understandable that Deandre Ayton needed to evolve his game under Monty Williams, right? We knew that. But it might have gone too far. It might have changed his mentality in such a way and hampered things. And he's only 25. All right. I'm not going to go too far with this, but just allow yourself, again, that word imagine, to reconsider some of the things that Ayton was just not ever empowered to do that we thought of as part of his skill set during the Monty Williams, Chris Paul era. And that brings us to Chris Paul. Let's put the nitty-gritty of basketball a little bit behind us. There will be no more stats in this segment. And think about more of the personality side. And I want to read you a chunk of a story from Dan Bickley in the aftermath of the second-round loss to Dallas in 2022. And it was about the acceptance, that's what he's going to be referring to at the beginning of this quote, of just how chill and weird it all was, if you remember. Of course you remember. The chunk is, their acceptance is both suspicious and unnerving, especially when a team with elite chemistry and depth had very little of either at the bitter end, a team where a genteel servant leader, Monty Williams, engaged in a very public display of mutual dissatisfaction with Deandre Ayton, and according to multiple sources, had something of a fallout with veteran leader Chris Paul. I guess here's where I'm going to go with it, right? And it really is that Game 7 blow-up that happened. If even Monty, who was supposed to be on the same page with Chris Paul, and the marriage of those two guys was supposed to be the leadership, the top-down leadership of the team, as well as the on-court style of the team, was all supposed to come from that union of Monty and Chris Paul. If it didn't even work between them, then it's understandable how some of the other guys would have been affected. And in this case, it's like, it makes sense that it would be Ayton, right? Sometimes the tension, I think, between two athletes actually can be traced back to sports. Like, we always try to, I think, maybe out of respect, maybe out of like humility of just limiting, like not stepping over the line of speaking on things that we don't know. But I think that actually prevents us from just opening our eyes at times, right? I'm actually going to take it away from what I don't know and look at what we do know, which is that Ayton was forced to sacrifice on this team because 0.5 ball from Monty, from Chris, relied on him being a screener and roller, right? It worked wonderfully at times, worked not so wonderfully at other times, and led to a bunch of finger pointing and questioning and losing in key moments. But once the other stuff started working less, he was still expected to sacrifice for something that was not working, right? And I think I know it's so weird, and the part of why I try to leave the Ayton stuff alone is like, I've watched this guy for the entirety of his career. I mean, including Arizona. I watched tons of the Wildcats games that year because we all knew that they might draft him, right? And we've gone too far in the direction of him not being good. Like, just not being good. There is a good player there, and it might be a different kind of good player, but maybe that's not for the worse, right? Because with Chris Paul, by the end, the on-court stuff actually was less of the problem, I think, in terms of like his production, his ability to play a role. It's why you just saw the Warriors convince themselves, okay, like, let's try this, right? It's just that he was not willing to adjust his game according to his limitations and his aging. And so when you look at a system, a philosophy that was implemented and built around the ideas and beliefs and like attributes of Monty and Chris, and then, you know, Monty had some problems, whatever, but more importantly, that whole philosophy broke down because Chris Paul wasn't willing to let go of it. And Ayton being the guy who had to sacrifice the most out of all of that, I can see it's just not hard to understand. And especially when you look at the microcosm of that Game 7, it is just a moment in time when everything is breaking. And for Ayton to be the recipient of the drama is understandably angry. And I think angering, and I've maintained that the whole time. I never went in on Ayton for what happened in the middle of that Game 7 because everybody should have been embarrassed, right? But it is understandable that him being the punching bag in a moment where everybody should be getting punched would be infuriating. So to come full circle with this and to wrap up on the Zach Lowe point that it should be priority number one to get Ayton on the same page, on the right page, and everything else, I don't think that's as hard as it might sound. I don't think that this is a losing proposition, that Ayton is just a lost cause. I think that a little bit of change of role offensively, not even resulting with more shot attempts, but how he's utilized, dipping back into some of the things that we thought he might be able to do that he wasn't really able to do under Monty Williams, trying that, seeing if it involves him more and gets him on board, and then hoping that being the bottom of a totem pole that was broken in half and, laying on the ground nearby by the end, under Monty and Chris, works for the better. We'll see. None of this is me saying this is what will happen. But again, I'm thinking about what his mentality was, getting a little bit more imaginative about not being better at what his role was under Monty, but being good at a different type of role could do for him. And in the end, agreeing with Zach Lowe that the most important factor of all of this is that it works. And so if I'm Kevin Young, if I'm Frank Vogel, if I'm James Jones, I'm trying to put myself in his headspace and relate to him and empower him in new ways too. That's not just me as a podcaster trying to do a thought experiment. That is what has to happen. Let's talk about Udoka Azubuike, who was signed on a two-way contract on Monday, filling the second such slot for the Suns. What does he bring to the team, and what does his addition tell us about how the Suns view their roster? Next, first, one more word from Ibotta. Ibotta is a really cool product. I've used a lot of these types of things. We all shop so much more online now. We all can lose track of that type of stuff, and it's officially summer, which means new clothes for a lot of people, and we're heading into fall already, meaning maybe more new clothes. Your closet shouldn't be the only thing growing when you make these purchases. Now you can also watch your cash back grow with each purchase using Ibotta. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, as well as the average shopping trips. You can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop, and you get your cash back easy. The average Ibotta user earns $120 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, or you could use your cash back to buy that flight you've been eyeing, that game you're dying to go to, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app, and use code LOCKED. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKED when you sign up. Alrighty, we are closing out the show with some quick thoughts on Udoka Azubuike. You probably heard of him. He was at Kansas for 4 years. He was a first-round pick from the Jazz 3 years ago, and they declined his fourth-year option, I believe, meaning that he became a free agent and lingered on the market. A little bit curious to me, but at the same time, I get it, why he became available. He is a little bit older. He is a very specific thing. There is not really a untapped ceiling on Udoka Azubuike that has not been discovered. I think we know what he is. It's just about, can he do that at a good enough level to succeed? And I think he can. And it also fits with the Suns' philosophy this year in a couple of different ways. One, it is this idea of the mid-prime veteran, right? It is somebody who has a little bit more to develop into, but is also not raw as raw can get. You're not talking about a 19-year-old who, is coming out of G League Ignite or college or high school or prep school or something and being expected to contribute. You're talking about a guy who has NBA minutes. I mean, he has played, a total of 600 NBA minutes already, including 4 years of college at a blue blood program, right? And so that is a good floor to start from, but also is only 3 years into his pro career and is only 23, so could get better. Makes a lot of sense. It also makes sense from the standpoint of size. We saw this with Bol, and it was the one reason that I was maybe most intrigued by the addition, is that he just provided something that the other additions that the Suns made this offseason didn't, which is a legitimately big center who you could very much see as a paint protector in Frank Vogel's defensive system, dropping into the paint, defending pick and rolls, and just squeezing out the rim, right? And I think Azubuike is somebody who, at the very least, we know can do that. We know can fill that basic role. He's 6'10". He has been a good rim protector the whole time we've all been watching him. Last year, he got his most minutes and maybe had his worst rim protection season in terms of blocks, but that's to be expected to a degree. Offensively, he makes all of his interior shots. I mean, he shot 96% in the restricted area last year, which is just pretty much unfathomable. His combination of length and strength and size just gives him a pretty much automatic bucket if he gets the ball around the basket. The problem has been for him forever is that his offensive game does not extend beyond that point. You're not going to see this guy, taking a floater, let alone a jumper. Although he did make 38% of his shots in the extended paint last year, which is a decent step forward for him. He shot 59% on those, but he took 38% of his shots from there, so that's a little bit more comfort. Maybe there's more there, but you're looking at a guy who's going to make his shots around the basket. Again, I'll return to the problem. I got off track. The problem is he just turns the ball over too much. The offensive game is limited, but he also, most importantly, turns the ball over way too much. 18% turnover rate each of his 3 NBA seasons, and somewhere around 15 to 20% turnover rate even at the college level, right? I mean, you compare that to Devin Booker, who has the ball in his hands a ton and is being triple teamed and all this stuff, and he had a 10% turnover rate the past 2 seasons. So, even in very limited situations, Azubuike coughs the ball up way too much. He is just one of these centers who, from a skill standpoint, just has a very, very long way to go. He does not have good hands, very similar to what we've seen with Bismack Biyombo, and that just limits what he's going to be able to be at the next level, which is the pro level, which he has not really caught on at, perfect example. Bismack Biyombo last season, 18% turnover rate. That is exactly what we were talking about. But this is a two-way contract. This is somebody who is really only going to be playing if, multiple injuries strike at the center spot. If, let's say, Chimezie Metu doesn't pan out, if Bol doesn't pan out, and Eubanks or Ayton are injured. That is how deep you're talking about going for Azubuike to even see the floor, let alone actually have to make an impact, So I like it a lot. I think you could see him continue to get better under Vogel and on a more talented team, but I also think, you don't have to. It's just a two-way contract, and considering the Suns' track record where they're not going to go out and get these 19-year-olds and really focus on developing them, the two-way cost of kind of opportunity cost of they could have gotten a guy like that and grown him into something. Well, history tells us they're not going to. So there's only so much you're going to hear me criticize the team or anybody for doing something that they're not interested in doing. You're just making stuff up at that point. So with all that said, I like it. I was advocating for Trey Jemison to get this type of slot. I think Azubuike is probably more of a sure thing, more of a higher floor, higher starting point for development than Jemison would have had, and I like it. So see how much he impacts the team. We'll see how much he even plays, but That is a W on one roster spot after an offseason full of W's on roster spots from the Phoenix Suns. We'll be back Friday with thoughts on these new Suns jerseys and more with Aaron Edwards to close out the week. So hit follow or subscribe. 3 shows per week in your feed on any podcast app as well as YouTube here on Locked On Suns feed throughout the month of August, and back hitting the ground running with daily shows next month. I will talk to you guys next time.